Hi, everybody. It's me, Jacobo. And as I promised on my Instagram, I was to record this video explaining AI from my perspective, try to explain it in extremely very simple terms. I'll break this video like in several components. So I will start with the basics, like what is AI? Can you explain me AI in very simple terms? I will explain about costs. There's another question that I got. If it's expensive, what is the infrastructure about AI, and so on. And the third section, I will talk about legal, which is something that was requested more than quite a few. I think it was one of the most queries I got. People to asking me to explain copyright, regulation. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any qualification on, especially on law, especially on copyright, data privacy. Everything that I will share with you is something that is from readings that I have done, from videos that I have watched. I will put some reference on the description, so I think it should be there, where you can look at a material that I think I find quite relevant and and they explain the particularities of the law regarding AI. Because one thing that there needs to be understood, that AI is all encompassing. It doesn't necessarily narrow down to creative fields, but you also need to take into consideration areas like science, medicines, which actually there's a lot of advancements around that area. So you need to understand that, for example, matters like a copyright need to be extended onto those fields, especially. And I can give you one specific example: is medicine and medical formulas. So, I mean, what is who's going to retain the copyright of that particular formula? So, try to think it on that big scheme. Try to always think about the bigger picture. But I will elaborate more once I get into the law matter. And then I will finish with some questions about the philosophy of AI. I got really good questions about if AI has a soul, if what it means to be AI, to be sentient, and what are the risks that I personally foresee about AI. So, and on that one, I think I did a little bit of research more on the philosophical front. So I watched, as I put it on my Instagram, I made references to certain movies that I found that are very good, that discuss or explore AI from a philosophical standpoint. And I decided to reread very quickly, because I've read it before a few times, the Brothers Karamazov, which in my opinion, is one of the most deeply philosophical books ever written. So, what is AI? How does it work? And can you explain this to me in very simple terms? The best way to explain it is through two concepts. One is the concept of probability, which is the best word that I can think of to describe probability is likelihood. So what is the most probable likely outcome to something that you think about? And the other one is semantics, which is a study of meaning, of why this is a pen and not a dog, or why this is a pen and what that represents, the meaning of this as a pen. That are the studies called semantics. The concept of AI as a semantic search engine, meaning like having some sort of like a calculator that is able to interpret meaning. What's something that was really kind of like a conceived, at least in an abstract term, like in the 70s. It was later kind of like a refined in the 80s and 90s, where with advancements in two fields. So in the fields of linguistics, so people that study language, the philosophical understanding of language, and consequently studying semantics or meaning, and then on the field of probability, right, which is the advanced studies on probability, which was the probability was always a study with the capacity to predict or to achieve certainty over a thought. So, for example, in weather, agriculture, you want to predict your seasons, so you want to be certain or more accurate that you're going to be correct. So people start taking patterns of or taking weather patterns and when it rains and when it's not, etc., and putting everything into a log, and then log eventually fitting into as a computational progressing to the digital world, putting into a computer, and then building this model that can say with certain level of confidence or certainty is going to rain during this period, etc., etc., etc. And then the stock market, etc., etc., etc. And eventually at one point, and I think it was close to the 70s and 80s, these two realms that look very distant at the beginning, they eventually kind of like converged. Some people, especially maybe about 10, 15 years ago, again, you can find the precise dates on the internet because there are different sources, but for the sake of this video, the dates are really irrelevant because I'm trying to explain the basics in a very oversimplified way, the basics of AI. So let's give it 10 years ago, 15 years ago. People realized that they can actually compute the probability of a one word being next to another one. The reason why they managed to compute it is because now with the power of computers, now you have and the power of computers and the beauties of copyright law, because under copyright, technically you can use, again, oversimplified, you can use material or anything where the author has died 17 years ago or so, rough give and take. That material of that author becomes part of the public domain, so meaning that you can use it for all sorts of things, even commercially. So again, I mean, there has been thousands and probably millions of books, and I think Google started that initiative to start like feeding and digitalizing all those books, and eventually as you're digitalizing all these books, a lot of people start getting that material, and eventually someone got curious to try to think about the relationship between that word next to another one, and one of the incentives was actually translation. The prior, and I think it was in the 90s, when you go to Word and so on, the translation was very linear, right? So it was trying to translate word by word. So, but when you read it throughout, it reads very funny because there's the context, the meaning, the semantics is not well captured. So some scientists decided to study that, perhaps find a way to try to represent semantics, the meaning, in a mathematical way. So what they did, they took, and I take this book as an example, they take, for example, this word, which is the word girls, next to the word three, and so on, right? And eventually they did this, and then that representation of three girls dot stop their faces, etc. Having that these different numbers together have another of the product of those numbers have a value, and then you multiply by these books, by many books, by billion books, and so on. You have this gigantic database of what is called in the industry as a gigantic database of vectors, of like a token, and that kind of like a metadata, that numeric representation. And eventually they realized that you can actually get a numeric representation of context of those words next to each other in the paragraph and so on. And eventually they kind of like decode or found a way to decode meaning. And then obviously they continued to start experimenting, and then you ask a question, and then you convert it into a numeric representation. And then using probabilities, you take the numeric representation and you try to find in your bigger database, let's say the Google database, you want to find the material that is closest or most likely to this question, right? So basically, that's how you manage to find an answer to this query. So what AI really allows is expanding by putting that capacity to search semantically. You eventually have the capacity to create, but you're not technically creating per se. You are just retrieving. Given the vast amount of information, you are returning more or context or richer context around to the question. So it looks like you are creating something out of the blue because you have that word that you didn't fit into, but technically you're not really creating per se. You are not really creating in the abstract sense that I'm imagining something. That's not what AI is doing. What AI is doing is returning you something that is very close based on gazillions of records that it has on and by records I mean because the way that AI breaks down its data, when you talk about text, the minimal unit of text is called a chunk, which is roughly like 3 letters, and then you have gazillions of chunks of all languages of everything. When you have to music, it's called a bit, so like the little bit. And when you have video or image, you call it a pixel, right? So you have X amount of pixels. So you have this gazillion of pixels so that unit that has this representation, which is called in the field is called metadata, and which you can tie to anything. So this, like for example, in text you have a number, but when you have image, like for example, you have an image of a dog, and you take this dog and you have to take you take a photo of a dog, and let's say that photo of a 20, let's say it's 12 million pixels, like the one that you see on the camera. Like say your camera has 12 million pixels. Effectively, that image is made of 12 million points. So what you do is you take each point, each of the 12 million, and you tag it to dog, 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 and you can add more. It's a dog of this particular place, of this, etc. And the name of the dog was this, and the color of the dog was, etc., etc., etc. And you can put thousands or millions of metadata, and you can do that for billions of images of dogs. So basically, when you query something, basically what you're getting in return is what appears to be random. Appears random is because there are just gazillions of bits and chunks and pixels and so on, of gazillions of information that come back, that are closest to your context. So, but technically it's really not, well, it's random because it's very rich, but if you really think mathematically speaking, it's really not random as in the abstract term of coming up with something that has never been thought. That's not necessarily true. And it's also not abstract because it's really coming from a gazillion of a database that has gazillions of records behind. So what you're creating is out of like a very rich, very robust databases behind, which is the data, which is actually what you hear, that in order to build an AI, you need to have a lot of data behind. And what I mean a lot is not 2 or 3 records, it's millions and millions and millions. And again, the more you feed it, the more precise and richer and more, the richer and more precise and more fine-tuned the database becomes. So that is effectively what AI is the best way to understand it, and the best way to actually explain it to people is that AI is just this giant semantic calculator. So that is actually the best way to understand it, that you have a calculator that is now searching for the numeric representation of meaning. Why AI hallucinates? And that is a question, I found that a very good question. It's a question that is asked very often, and is a field that I have spent a lot of time both researching and coding. on try to understand the reasons behind the hallucinations. And my research have narrowed down into two things, or basically into one big thing. In the world of AI, the most important element of any interaction is not the question, it's the context of that question. What do I mean by the context? When you and I are having a conversation, the conversation flows through a certain context. So we are talking about, let's say, we're talking about the housing market in Hong Kong, right? And as we talk, we are using verbals. So I'm using words to convey a thought, and you're using words to convey another thought. But the main idea, it doesn't need to be repeated, is kept there in an abstraction that we both understand. We know that these verbals that we are using, it goes along the abstraction of the topic. When I realized that most of the engines that I have studied, I always sensed that the engines understood the context of the conversation very differently. So, and to actually make me investigate how these engines build context. And I think there are three parameters into context. Number one is the question that you're asking. The second one is the context of that question. When you're interacting with AI, is a seeking information interaction. You ask to retrieve something out. You're different than humans, that we sometimes talk for the sake of talking, and we are very good at talking and not listening. AI is a very good listener. The problem is where AI struggles is try to infer the meaning of the question. So I'll give you an example. If you ask an AI, hello, well, now these engines have been trained to pretty much address that question. But if you ask a question like, tell me about Tuesday, something like that, the bot has to figure it out, what are you talking about? The best way to address that is by being very precise into the question. So meaning that when you have a question, you need to surround it with certain context. Meaning that you need to explain very well why are you asking this question. And there is in prompt engineering, and they all suggest that not to limit a question to just the question or make it too generic, because you're inviting the bot to hallucination. So where you want to interact with ChatGPT and so on, to reduce hallucination, ask very precise questions. You need to reduce the assumptions. And the best way to do that is by thinking your question in terms of a context. You need to think that is the information that you're seeking needs to the information that you're seeking needs to be surrounded by a valid context. So my advice to anybody that if you really want to minimize minimize hallucination is enrich the context of your question. The more precise, the more detailed, the better your question is. And in terms of the model, the other reason that drives the hallucination is simple data. And I can tell you because I built a lot of solutions, like enterprise solution that use the company, like customer data. And sometimes they give me like 2 documents. And it's technically impossible for an LLM to answer a question where you have 2 documents where you have 100 sentences combined. It's very little context. So usually my ratio is like for probably like for 10 sentences of answer, you need to give me at least 10 times that, probably 1,000 rows of sentences. Try to keep that ratio. But basically what you're doing, every time you interact with an AI, being image, being video, being audio, is just you are retrieving information in a semantic way. You are retrieving the meaning of that information. So that is very important to keep in mind. How much it cost, and are these engines expensive? The answer is yes and no. It really depends. So what I'm going to explain is I'm going to emphasize a lot on text, which I think is the most common one. But by now you should kind of have a good understanding that they all work more or less the same. That you have a piece of information, a chunk, a bit, a token, a pixel, whatever, and you have a lot of like a metadata or meaning tied to it. And then what you're retrieving is that. The cost of that retrieval, I don't necessarily that expensive. The cost, for example, in I think it's OpenAI, which is the one that I work the most, or the one that I use, at least on my corporate solutions, because it's by far the most advanced engine. And I have tried all of them. It costs like fractions of a cent of a dollar, like 1,000 tokens, which is roughly 700 words, give and take. It's about the cost of that. It's about like 3 cents of a US dollar. By the way, I think I need to explain that because I need a big technical. But when if you're going to read about AI, you're going to talk about AI, you're very likely going to hear the term chunk and or token. Actually, yeah, chunk is the big one, but so a chunk is comprised of many tokens. Yeah, correct. So a token, it's like the lowest level of a text AI, and a token is roughly, just to have you a very rough idea, is about 3 letters, right? So it's not a word, it's a fraction of the word, and it's roughly comprised by about three letters, more or less, give and take, just to think about those terms that sometimes is 4, sometimes is 2, yeah, depending on the word in itself, but roughly is about 3 letters. And then you tag metadata, a lot of metadata meaning to that letter. So the cost of retrieving that information, I don't necessarily is very high, but then that it depends on the frequency of your use. So if you are like, for example, a corporate solution that you're retrieving, let's say 1 query every minute or 2 queries every minute, and you get like, I don't know, 100 tokens or 100 words or 200 words out of it, it's just going to be fractional, like probably, I don't know, $1 US or so, less. But if you're like a data aggregator where you receive like for example Google, where you receive millions of queries per second, then the cost is actually much higher. So, but for simple terms, especially because I'm mindful of my audience, I don't necessarily think that everybody is trying to build a high frequency engine, because otherwise you won't be listening to me. You will be listening you will be researching somewhere else. But for the benefit of my audience, I assume that you guys have a very basic understanding of AI. Is that if you're trying to build something on AI, your primary cost is going to be on manpower, meaning on the person that is going to build the AI for you. And the reason is because one thing that people need to understand is this: there's no AI without the input of a human and the intervention of a human, because AI cannot think in abstract terms. What do I mean by that? The data, when you're feeding data into an AI, it needs to be organized in a certain way, right? Think about your email account, right? That decision to either create subfolders and organize it, or maybe leave it to randomly and use the search engine to look for your emails, is a decision that you as a human decided because it was the best fit for you. That is a decision that doesn't come out of a probability, because many people have many approaches on how to handle their inbox. So, but that is something that came out of your own imagination, out of your own abstraction. As I pointed out before, AI doesn't think in those terms. They think in probability. If you ask AI to organize your inbox, very likely it's going to tell you to do like folders and so on. And maybe you're going to clash with it because perhaps you just search, you find it much easier just to search the search bar, right? And you think that this AI is dumb. It's like, no, it's because statistically speaking, perhaps there's more people using subfolders than the search bar. When you want to build an AI tool, basically what you want to pay, number one, is for that manpower, for that person or that team that is going to organize the data and then process it, feed it, but and have that design, that abstract process of designing something out of the blue and then feeding it into the AI. Once it's fed, the AI can go on its own, and then they will do the semantic searches and so on. So that is actually the reason why I have to say, and I insist on always describing AI as a tool and nothing else than that. AI is not going to kill you. Is AI, okay, unless you program the AI to kill you. But that is a different conversation. But AI in itself, unless it has an abstract input from a design point of view made by a human, the AI won't do anything. Think about a car, right? You have a beautiful car, but without a driver, that is just not a car or not an operating car. The car is there, but it's static. If you want the car to function, you need to have the abstraction of a very good driver in it that can imagine and execute on the road. That is the best way to describe it. And perhaps to make a parenthesis on self-driving and the AI. So the way that self-driving cars work in a big scheme of things, in a big oversimplified things, they have received gazillions and gazillions and gazillions of videos, of images of those roads, or many roads, right? At different points of time, during the day, during the night, with traffic, with no traffic, etc., etc., etc. Then you take those gazillions of video material, break it down into pixels, you metadata every single pixel, and then when the Tesla car is driving and is using the camera as real time, basically what it's doing is pinging. Like I see this pixel of a car, what it is, it's sending things like a very fast, because the beauty of, and I will talk about later in terms of infrastructure, the beauty is that because we have 5G and on ultra high speed internet connectivity, you can make these responses very, very quick. And also what is stored in the CPU of these cards, and therefore these bots can actually predict that is a kid, that is a car, that is a road, that is in the evening, that etc., 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 because all those historical videos, billions of videos with billions of data have been already enriched. And that is, again, if you think about, if you understand how the self-driving works, then you will fully understand how the text engine works, and you will fully understand how the image recognition works. When you think about, especially like on self-driving cars, the amount of computations, of calculations that these computers are doing, especially for those ones that work real time, if you ask me if the cost is high, my answer is no. So, but what you're going to pay at the beginning is manpower, is paying someone that has the capacity to think in abstract terms, not in probabilistic terms, to build something that is going to solve a problem for you. And that is something that we do, for example, that I do at the company that I found. When I build a solution, I don't come with a solution saying like, I'm going to code it for you, because actually quite an interesting story. When I understood like how this like AI works and how much information is there, I found it very liberating, because I realized that even though I don't come from an IT background, I'm not a programmer, but I realized that I don't need to code. I don't, and in reality, by now I know how to read code, of course, But I don't code because when I was researching about AI, I realized that my role as a human is to think in abstract terms, and they do that translation into a concrete command to the LLM. That's, for example, how I code and I have built very complex AI engines. But because the AI in itself is always better than coding than me, and I think the role, if we want to think about the future, how we're going to live with AI, is going to be that we need to understand that our role is to command abstraction, and the role of the AI is to compute probabilities. So when I ask the bot to code my abstract thinking, like write me a code that searches this particular letter, which is an abstract thought, and I pass that to command to the ChatGPT, that ChatGPT was going to give me the most precise answer to my abstraction. So when I understood that, and luckily I wanted to understand it very early, and I realized like I don't need to code because this AI will always code better than I do. If you're going to think about and want to compete with AI, you're on the losing end, because in a probabilistic terms, these AIs are going to always be more precise. But if you're going to think in abstract terms, coming from something out of the blue, you're always going to defeat the AI. And one of those fields is art. Like how artists interpret reality, an AI will never be able to do it. Never. Because AI is always giving you the most probabilistic outcome based on a lot of data that has happened in the past. So think about abstraction. You need to master. My strongest advice to all of you is to do that. Master abstract thinking, and then you're good for life. So let's talk about perhaps one of the most asked topics on my Instagram, which was AI and the law. So I guess if you have been following my talk, you kind of like get the idea that the way that I see AI is just this big semantic calculators, right? That you type something and it will give you the closest semantic representation of it, right? Of any field, music, video, etc., etc., etc. But it's just semantic, and it's based on historical records because it's just everything that is being built out of a database. So in the terms of law and regulation, I think there will be three main fronts where AI is being studied extensively. One is an evaluation of risk, which that primarily comes into regulation. And I think the easiest to understand approach is the European approach. Again, okay, just to make it clear that the country that is spending the most in terms of law and regulation and the most advanced, and certainly the ones that are going to set the standard, are technically three countries. Is United States, China, and the European Union, right? They are the most advanced, and there's a lot of cooperation and discussion and sharing of information between the three of them, right? And so there are three fronts. One is a regulatory front, which is taking, and very prudently, is taking a risk approach. So in terms of regulation, the approach has been, so in everything that is going to come, the different laws and everything that is going to come out of the regulation is they are looking into the AI from the impact that it has on society from a risk perspective. So you have engines that have, like, for example, low risk, meaning that it has a low impact on a personal level, meaning that it's just like a search engine that gives you documents. So it doesn't threaten you or affect you in any way. It's not handling personal information, nothing. It's just like just a query search. And then you have all the way up to the spectrum of high risk are engines that compromise your personal integrity. So I think from engines that are processing, for example, your personal data, which are engines, for example, like Instagram, marketing engines, and so on, that take all your personal metadata. So, for example, when you look into a photo, Every time you do have an interaction, for example, on Instagram, immediately it tags that interaction. For example, you click on a photo, you like the photo, it immediately tags that photo with your ID, with your location, with your sex, your gender, everything, right? So it gets a lot of metadata. So it builds a lot of meaning to that interaction, and then that's passed to commercial companies to make use of it. So that, for example, is considered a high risk model, and the riskiest of all models is autonomous machines that will be that could be threatening to the existence of humanity. For example, killer robots or self-driving cars, for example, will be on a high risk level, and so on. So I guess when it comes, for example, let's give an example of ChatGPT. So ChatGPT as a tool in itself is low risk, but sometimes the output, for example, if it's doing if it's returning false claims or false information and so on, that changes the spectrum of risk, because it's giving you misleading information that can actually have a negative effect. For example, indoctrination, etc., etc., etc. I think you can grab the idea. But so that regulation is taking like a risk approach, and that is important to understand. That because different regulation will come. For example, in very high risk models, you need to do disclosures. You need to kind of validate the models from where they come, etc., etc., etc. On low risk, certainly is going to be less demanding because the impact is much less. The way that AI works is, so when I put a query and I retrieve information, I can create something what is called an agent, which is instead of giving you as a response, I can give you this information. Let's say that information turns out to be like a tag, and that tag is do this, like an action, and then that return, rather than going to your browser, is going to feed something else, and that something else is going to perhaps trigger a mechanical action. So, for example, I give you an example of if you have seen the TV show in Netflix called Black Mirror, so the one with the killer dogs. You will actually understand why that AI is considered high risk. So those dogs are what in the AI industry is called an agent. So an agent is anything that has that sense of agency, that it has the capacity to be autonomous or act on its own or perceived on its own. But basically, someone in the design in the design part, when it was building the abstraction, saying that if you see this person, so you feed the photo of the person, or you do that, or you have the camera, if a person moves in a certain way, whatever, so rather than tell me what it is, no, go and kill that person, right? So you give, and the more you give that sense of agency, which is that will to act, or that power to act, right? And then something that can be exploited. It can be exploited into LLMs, where they're giving you a lot of falsehoods and false information, and it happens a lot, for example, on Instagram and YouTube, and these companies are fighting that. They are because these feeds are self-reinforcing, so that's why you always see kind of the same videos and the same people and the same influencers, because it doesn't have the abstraction to think out the box. So if someone goes and feeds something, contaminates the data, or contaminate with something that is false, it can create a chain reaction like a virus, and then eventually start spreading false information. So that will be considered high risk. So even if it's an LLM, but the capacity that it has, that agency capacity to disseminate, to act and disseminate false information, that will be considered high risk. So all the three countries are more or less addressing the regulation in that way. And that is that's something that it needs to be taken into account, because I think when it comes to AI, I think what is next, I think is what is called these agents. These entities that have an LLM, a large language model, that receive information, and instead of giving you a response, is actually giving you is commanding an action. And we saw it with the little, I think not recently, like the partnership that Apple had with OpenAI, is effectively to give Siri a sense of agency, to Siri to be able to command and to action. So that, for example, that would be a high risk type of model. So agencies, I think, is going to be the next big thing in AI, and but I don't think it's going to be there yet, because the regulation is going to be. So, for example, the European regulation is going to be phased out. So I think it kickstarts in 2025 and so on. So, and I think they're going to explore a lot in the field of agents. Any agent, even if it's pure text to text, but if you have an agent that is doing right, they're giving you a response, is acting upon the information that it processed, then it will follow into a different category in terms of regulation. The other question that I think is quite critical to take is copyright. So when it comes to copyright, we are kind of need to understand from where copyright comes from. And I will use the field of manufacturing, right? So in manufacturing, you have a raw material, right? Let's say copper, yeah, well, bulk of copper. I don't know, a lingot, or I don't know what kind of a material or what kind of like a measurement copper comes, but let's say it's that unit of copper, raw copper, right? So it's a basic material, has no much added value, it's just there, right? But then you bring it into a factory that kind of like cuts that unit of copper, processes it, and makes cables, right? So there's a process of transformation, right? The way that it works transactionally is that you buy the copper from the copper supplier. So you pay the copper supplier, so you pay for the rights to that copper as a lingot, and then you add value. And then on manufacturing and so on, you come up with a new price for the new wires, which will include all your production cost, everything, as long as the cost of that you're trying to recover the cost of copper. But basically, what you're adding up is the extra value that you put on, right? And in copyright, it's good to think in similar ways. So when you have to copyright, let's say, and especially the creative arts, right? There are the concept of transformation, which I think is called inspiration or influence in the copyright law. But it's more or less along the same lines. It's actually quite important. So under current copyright law, is being defined that if you are sourcing material, as long as it's transformed sufficiently to develop something new, you have title over that something new, right? And you can always go, yeah, I'm inspired by this person, but this is a totally different work, and it sounds different, it reads different, everything. Like, for example, I give you, like in my Instagram feed, I quote a lot of sources, but if you combine all that together, it's really my voice, right? So there's a concept of transformation. Even though I source from many materials, through my abstract thinking, I transform those materials into a new idea. That's usually what you see on my Instagram, right? But what is interesting is that when it comes to title, to copyright, title is given to a person, a human being, right? And a corporation, I mean, trademark and so on, but you could technically defend that well, yeah, actually you can say that as a corporation also has agency and therefore can claim copyright law. But it's being defined that AI in itself, because AI is being understood that it's just a tool, like a calculator, and AI alone has no sense of agency, and therefore the AI alone as a calculator, as a device, if you think about it, has no title, because that device, the agent, has no sense of agency. There's no legal representation, has no name, has no address, etc. It has no, it's not a person in the legal sense. So everything that is being manufactured through AI, technically the output of the AI belongs to the public domain, unless you prove that the abstract design of that output belongs to you as a person or as a corporation, and the AI was merely a tool. If you can prove that, like for example, when you use Adobe Firefly or Photoshop, right? The Photoshop is just a tool, and the output, even though it was given by Adobe, you have ownership of that output, and that is actually quite important to consider. So that's the reason I keep insisting pretty much from the beginning of this conversation that the best way to think about AI is that limit AI to always think AI as a tool, as a mechanism, as a calculator that has no sense of agency, it has nothing. And the reason why this is going to become quite interesting in the future is because as you give agency to these AIs, because these AIs are conveying meaning that the AI has the capacity to actually understand, because it's a semantic calculator. As you give agency, like, okay, with this instruction you do this, and with this instruction you do this and you do this, eventually to something that appears to be sentient or be aware or self-aware. That debate is going to become even more heated, like, because basically like, I'm training someone or I'm training something to produce something for me. But then the debate will come like to what extent you like supervised or manage the productive output. If you have no intervention, if that output was 100% autonomous on its own will, very likely that from the law that is today, right now, that output belongs to the public domain. But if you can actually prove that that was just a tool, and the tool alone was not acting autonomously, it was acting on behalf of your agency, the title is yours. And that is something that is very important to understand. And again, as I said, the concept of agency is going to become huge, a huge debate. In 3 years' time, everybody will be talking about agents and agency in the world of AI. And the third one, which is the big topic, is on data privacy. And this is a very punctual question that I ask about Adobe. I mean, and for example, on the terms of reference, which actually are quite a standard term, saying that if Adobe is actually using my data to train their models. And the answer is yes, right? Because when you use not only Adobe, when you use Adobe, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, all this Meta, Instagram, everything, basically when you subscribe to these programs, you actually authorize for them to use your data for training purposes. But what they do, as I explained earlier, they take all your data, they break it down into chunks, pixels, bits, whatever, the metadata, and they fed it into the big database. So it's extremely unlikely that the AI is going to reproduce a word that looks exactly like yours. I think it happened at the beginning because perhaps the metadata or the database wasn't that rich. But I think now, with all it's 2 years now into the AI, these databases should be quite rich, quite robust. So it's very unlikely that like Adobe or what is the Stable Diffusion and all these image ones is going to do a work that look exactly like yours. I think it's impossible because the sense of randomness that is being inbuilt to take as very accurate, very random, close approximations of the context that is being asked. So you also need to take into consideration that I think the fact that you're passing this data to the bots is going to become less relevant, because that once you feed it, that data is broken down into millions of pieces, and then it's metadata and then fed up into the big databases. So it's kind of like, I guess, lost and diluted into all that database. As of today, in 2024, these tools have not yet achieved sense of agency, and therefore they are not entitled to any law. So it's good, and I want to make that super clear, that in 2024, I don't see any AI today having sense of agency. Make it very clear. And therefore, my interpretation that the law today that strips out title to the AI is correctly applied. And now that brings me to the last topic of AI, which is a bit more philosophical, and which is, where do I see AI in the future? And I want to start with the question that I got asked, was whether I see AI having a soul. And I guess by now you can conclude, if you have been following the talk all along, you can conclude that the answer is no. Because, again, this is my interpretation. Because I only see I only see these tools as mere calculators, as semantic calculators. And I talk from a sense that I code AI, and I go to the really inside of these LLM engines, of the actual construction of the function. I go down to that deep level. I can only understand the AIs from that construction, from its raw code to the way that I actually build the AIs when I'm dealing with clients, that I can manipulate, that I can change, that I can manipulate is a good word, that I can manipulate, that I can convey any answer, that I can tell you it can behave this way or this other way. I remember sitting with a friend once, and I was showing her, like, look, I can make two bots to fall in love with each other, and we did it on the spot, because I do know how these bots think, and these bots thinks is just pure semantic calculators. I give an input, it's giving me a semantic output. If it has a soul, no. Can it achieve a soul? I think, thinking long term, I will say yes. And I think perhaps the movie Prometheus, the Ridley Scott one, it's a good indicator for that film. So the movie goes into the premise that you have this kind of like an android that it has to go with these humans to this remote planet, and apparently in this planet you have I think, how they call it, engineers, I think, like, they are supposed to be like the supreme human, the human that created the humans that we know, like the humans that live on Earth. And so he goes there, and then of course the computer being a computer, and I quote the great book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Mervyn. So the android, looking at the humans going, being all emotional and so on, and this thing very rational, enters into absolute despair and says, like, you know what, humans, there's no hope here. So that body, by that realization, acquires a sense of agency, and then what it decides is to act beyond the interest of the humans, and it tries to replicate or create its own living form. This android builds its own a species that turned out to be the aliens that we know. That's how that movie connects with the series Aliens. And I do find quite interesting, because what I learned about that film is the sense of agency, and when AI is going to acquire that sense of agency, of or what Nietzsche calls will to power. And at the moment, I don't think we are there yet. I don't think, and the reason I don't think we are there yet, and probably in about many years, could be 20 or more, is because I think there's far more information to be fed into these engines, and as long as you keep feeding these engines with information, these engines are always going to think in probabilistic terms. So, and I think the incentive of the people that are building these engines, for the people in Google or OpenAI and so on, is accuracy and precision. So, meaning that they want to fine tune these models to give you like the most possible outcome, meaning that even the designers, even on the abstract thoughts, they are thinking on probabilistic terms. They're always thinking, it needs to give me the most precise, the most accurate, the most closest information. So they are not feeding it into abstraction, like I create something out of the blue. I don't see, and I think for a machine or for anybody to think out of the blue, you need to start thinking about emotions and talking about love and talking about incentives. And on that one, I think the movie, I think which movie kind of like covers that topic well. I think Transcendence covers that. I think it's a bit cheesy the way that they do it on the end, with the guy's kind of like dying and so on. But I think the message is somewhat conveyed that the guy did that because the guy loved the wife, and he wanted to find a way to be with the wife all the time, and eventually he opted to turn everything down because he realized that it was doing more harm than good, and he realized that it was that abstraction, that emotional thinking that led him to think very differently, because he was driven by very mathematical, very precise will to power, and then realized like, no, my wife is sad and she wants to let me go, so I'd rather die and kill everything and just kill this project. So I think the premise of the film is quite interesting. But for example, Ex Machina, what I like about Ex Machina is because she's using deceit and manipulation, because she becomes self-aware, and she acquired a sense of agency, saying that I can manipulate this human emotionally so I can be superior. And I found that premise like, wow, super good. That's why I think it's my favorite AI film, Ex Machina. I think the one that captures best. So I highly recommend you to watch that film. So to answer the question, if AI have soul, no. If can develop a soul, not anytime soon, because it's, again, things in very probabilistic terms. And in terms of the risks that I see on AI, I think on this one is I want to quote the brothers Karamazov. If you haven't read the book, I'm going to leave a link on the description about this very good summary that I found very precise. This girl takes about 2 hours to go through the review alone, but it's very good. So to give you a summary of the book, so the book is a story of about 3 brothers plus 1, but let's focus on the 3 brothers plus the father, and the very frictional relationship they had with the father. The father starts with the premise that he's a very evil, very egocentric. This person cares about himself and nothing. This guy has like no morals. The guy only is extremely self-centered. So if this guy has to kill 1 million people for his own benefit, he will do it, right? And then you have the 3 personality traits, which is on the extreme. You have Alexei, which is this kind of like a very, very angelic, very good. He's all very full of love and compassion person. Then you have Ivan, which is the most pragmatic, which is the person that is that kind of like the intellectual, try to be very rational, but it gets easily convoluted by different by the talks of Alexei and the other brother, which is Dimitri. And Dimitri is also someone that he's trying to do good, but he's also looking at his own self-benefit, and eventually gets skewed towards, let's call it, the dark side, because the guy becomes very self-centered, even though he has like a little bit of a spirit of he's trying to do good, or he's trying to justify his bad actions through good deeds, or try to present it that is good. That's kind of like the argument that I justify my because the guy eventually he wants, because the father is kind of like awful. He's trying to fight for some inheritance, and the guy's like that. The father is like tricking him, like pay him in installments. It's very funny what happens, and the guy is really upset. So he said that he has the moral authority to call the father, because the father is absolutely awful person, which kind of can sympathize with that, but that makes you complicit as a reader. But eventually the person kind of like follows that path, and then we have Ivan, and Ivan is being tormented by seeing the good side of people, which is Alexei, and the bad side of the influence, which is Dmitry, and obviously the bad side of people, which is the father. And the person is trying to stay very rational, very intellectual, and eventually goes crazy. So, and I think that is actually where I do see AI at the moment. People that are designing AI, I think that they have a clear intention to make it a big awareness on how risky this AI could be. They're trying to make it as rational as possible. Therefore, what I put on my Instagram, that I think they're trying to build it as Ivan, very rational, very with no bias, no nothing, very fair, and so on. But I sense that if it's only kept like that, there's always going to be people that put their self-interest above everybody else, and then they're going to manipulate it for their own benefit. And then they will go into the side of Dmitry. So if I think AI is risky, yes. But I do think there's ample willingness from governments, from institutions to make AI an instrument that is not only rational but also quite empathic. And judging from especially from the regulation that is coming out of Europe, taking that risk approach, certainly they are fully aware of the impact, the negative impact that it could happen, how easily can get out of control. So it's risky, yeah, but I'm very hopeful that governments eventually will do the right thing. Yeah, that was it. That was a relatively long video, but I think it was worth it. So if you have any other questions about AI, I'm more than happy to continue a conversation. Then if you have about a project that you're thinking about it, or something, an idea that you have in mind, do let me know. Happy to talk about it. I can walk you through, and then perhaps I can help you build something. We can build something super interesting together. So yeah. So I hope to. So with all that said, I hope to hear from you guys very soon. Okay. Cheers. Bye.